Would you join me in welcoming both this evening?
Thank you, Tom. Well, in 10 minutes, the next 10 minutes, I will take you on a whirlwind tour of some of the most important biblical evidence on the issue of God's foreknowledge in the future. So I'll just go right into it. I will begin by briefly addressing the Old Testament evidence for an open view of the future where God doesn't know what human beings will freely choose. The discussion in Old Testament evidence will be in terms of the first two parts of the Hebrew canon, the law and the prophets, sidestepping the writings for the sake of time. One reason for this layout is to hide the fact that with the Old Testament passages, those who read entire books or groups of books will encounter evidence that may steer them away from conclusions about God not knowing the future indefinitely, which conclusions they may come to if they just read part of these books. With the text frequently proposed as supporting the idea that God does not possess definite foreknowledge of free human decisions, I focus my objection on how the text may be interpreted differently and how God's ignorance of what will be is not a necessary conclusion. With the text that I propose as supporting the idea that God knows for sure what we will freely choose, I will be qualifying my claims for how each piece of the evidence goes towards building, but still building a picture of a comprehensive, definite foreknowledge. With the New Testament evidence, I will focus only on adding positive evidence in favor of this conclusion, and this is because I am not aware of any substantial New Testament arguments specifically for God being ignorant of free human decisions. You should also have a handout in front of you with most of the text I'm appealing to. It will not apply to the initial ones on theism, because my opponent, Karen, has handouts for that too. So after those texts, you will actually have the text I'm appealing to for positive evidence in your handouts. First, the case for open theism from the law, as I understand it. What would the case for open theism from the law look like? These three sample texts give three categories of evidence. A, God repenting in response to human sin in Genesis 6. B, God testing his people in Genesis 22. And C, God repenting in response to intercessory prayer, say in Exodus 32. In Genesis 6, God is shown repenting about creating humans in response to human sin. However, does this passage demonstrate that God did not know that this was going to happen, as open theists claim? Well, I'm not going to answer that yet, but nevertheless, I believe it is fair to say that it shows at least that God grieved over human sin and that things were not as he desired. In Genesis 22, we see the most famous case of God testing his people. Did God not know for sure whether Abraham feared him before he acted in obedience, as open theists claim? It seems fair, though, to say that we have to account for how God apparently gained some kind of new knowledge in the aftermath of testing. In Exodus 32, we see God repenting in response to Moses' intercessory prayer. Did God not know beforehand that Moses was going to intercede for Israel and had to change his plans in response to Moses' prayer? Well, it seems fair to say that it shows God may include our prayers in his decisions. Now, a little further evaluation of the case for open theism from the law. With Genesis 6, the conclusion that God didn't know what was going to happen for sure is premature, I think. Why can't God grieve over what he knows will happen when it happens? Then in interpreting Genesis 22, there are other viable options. For instance, Geisler suggests that Abraham's actions prove by demonstration what God had previously known only in his mind. Piper suggests that there is a difference in kind between foreknowledge and experience in actual history. With Exodus 32, there's no reason why both Moses' prayer and God's response could not have been in God's eternal knowledge and plan all along. Moreover, as we shall see later, there are other texts that seem to show that God does know what humans will freely choose in the future. The case for open theism from the prophets is very much similar to that from the law. There are many divine repentance texts that show God changing emotions or actions in light of changed human relations. You can look at your handouts at those. There are also two categories of texts that I think come closest to implying that God did not foreknow definitely what humans will choose. They are texts where God says, perhaps, and where God laments failed expectations. Well, how are we to evaluate the divine repentance texts? I believe that they show that God responds to changed human relations to humans. Both the perhaps and failed expectation texts show, at least, the full extent of God's mercy and the folly, moral guilt of the people, and the justice of God's judgment. However, they don't necessarily show that God necessarily did know about the future. God may truly offer the people the chance to repent and save themselves from disaster if he knows, even if he doesn't know, they will not. He did not determine that they will not. It comes from their own self-determination. God's offer is not false or insincere if he intended to relent if the people repented. As for the failed expectations, even in our finite experiences, it is possible for us to have right and proper expectations, say for a child, even when we know the expectations will not be met from knowing the child well. Now, turn to some positive evidence. I had to go through this quickly. In Exodus chapters 13 to 15, I think we see that God knew when Pharaoh would not and would let Israel go. This seems to show that God knows future human choices definitely. Yes, we see God hardens Pharaoh's heart repeatedly, but still, God judges him and his nation as responsible. If we can agree that God cannot justly judge him if God was responsible for determining him to do this, so that he was not free to do otherwise, the only conclusion would be that God influenced him somehow towards this decision while preserving his free will. It is less than what would typically be considered libertarian freedom, and shows that perhaps some type of compatibilistic freedom is true at least sometimes, such as here, because the text also says Pharaoh hardened his own heart, so he was following his own desires. If God can know Pharaoh's future choices without overruling his freedom, it indicates that he can know other future human choices without having to determine them. Then moving on quickly to Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapters 31 and 32, God reveals his definite foreknowledge that after Moses' death, Israel will spurn him and break his covenant. Now, just because the current generation was rebellious and stubborn in the past doesn't mean they have to be so in the future, or much less future generations. So, for God to be sure they're going to break his covenant, it seems God has to know what's going to happen, what they're going to choose. Next evidence, Yahweh's definite foreknowledge that people won't repent is seen also in the prophets. For instance, in Isaiah and also Jeremiah and Ezekiel, there are statements of God revealing that he didn't really expect that the people will repent. Another case we see is with David. David, in 1 Samuel 23, hears that Saul was planning to go to Caleb to get him to destroy the city on his account. And God reveals to him that, yes, Saul will come, and David takes it as a definite knowledge of what would be if he were to stay, and he goes away. So it seems that God knows what humans would freely choose in a possible world if David had stayed. And if that's the case, God has middle knowledge of what will be, and he also then knows, if he has middle knowledge, what humans will freely choose in the actual world that comes about. Next category of evidence, as many as 2,323 prophecies seem possibly to hinge on free human decisions. This is argued by Steve Roy, and even though we don't have to agree with him on each case, there does seem to be some cases of prophecy that are specific enough that seem to require specific definite foreknowledge on God's part. Then in Isaiah chapters 40 to 48, God makes many claims for knowledge. Now we can say that this has to do with God determining to do things unilaterally. Yet there seems to be a lot of free human decisions that would have been involved, so that God would seem to would know a future that includes free human choices.